My name is Vanessa McCants. My moderator today is Jesse Harris. Jesse, are we recording? I see we're recording. Awesome. Okay, so I will be sharing my screen. Okay, so today's topic is making accessibility accessible, tips to try and examples applied. So as I mentioned, I am your presenter, Vanessa McCants. I'm a learning experience designer and UDL specialist at eConcordia. I would like to emphasize specialist and not expert. This field is always developing and changing. And today our moderator is Jesse Harris, so she'll be helping us out with answering questions in the chat, with polls, and making sure that I keep myself on time. As I mentioned, I am from eConcordia, so we were founded in 2001. We provide Concordia faculty members with online courses. We help them deliver and run them, and we have a large team from instructional designers, integrators, project managers, videographers, and many specialists. And so today, we will be looking at what is accessibility to make sure everyone has a shared understanding today. What does accessibility mean for eConcordia? Tips to make your in-class content more accessible. And then we'll have a very short showcase of eConcordia courses, or elements from courses rather, that are accessible, and then a short Q&A. So in 2018, Quebec adopted le standard sur l'accessibilité des sites web. So it was this law that said that all the web content of public organizations, including universities, needed to be accessible. So eConcordia, as the provider of all of Concordia's online courses, needed to figure out how to make all our back catalog and all our new courses accessible. So what is accessibility? What do we mean when we say accessible in the context rather of education? So accessibility is about equality. All people should have the same access to the same information. But it's also about equity. All people should have what they need in order to access that information. So this is when we talk about things like assistive technology, the way we design our courses to enable that they can access the content. So alternative text for images. And we'll go into more details about all those things. So let's take a moment to consider the curb cut. And if you've been to the other accessibility presentations today, you will have seen this before, but in the 1970s, disability rights movement really began to surge, and more communities were putting in curb cuts. So this is something that many of us may now take for granted, but if we think about how many people actually use this on a daily basis, it's not just wheelchair users, right? It's parents with strollers, it's a cello player lugging their cello along, tourists with luggage, right? Little grocery carts. If you've ever sprained your ankle or broken a leg, these have probably been very helpful as well. And what about captions, right? We stream a lot of our media now. How many of us have used captions? It's great for learning a language as well. If you have a newborn baby, like I do in the household, captions have been great when we want to keep the volume down to make sure we don't wake up the child. But it's about when we design for the outliers, we are designing to include the most amount of people. So then what does this accessibility mean for eConcordia? What did this new law really mean for us? So we did figure out how to get that equality and that equity into our courses. So we looked at course design first, and we decided to go with UDL because UDL says when environments are intentionally designed to reduce barriers, all learners can engage in rigorous, meaningful learning. So this is about taking down barriers, designing for those outliers, and including as many people as possible. And UDL is based on 3 different categories. So engagement, which is the why of learning, representation, the what of learning, and action and expression, or the how of learning. And it's about providing multiple means of these types of categories in your course. So engagement, we're talking about motivating students, getting them active in content and learning, representation, so the types of content, and then action and expression is like the assessments. So now that we decided that, okay, we're going to go with UDL, we're going to design our content, trying to reduce barriers, making sure we have these multiple means of representation, expression, and engagement. What do we do with the technology side of things? Because it's also very much what we do. Well, we learned quickly that most of the best practices that are there for online accessibility are web-based. And by web-based, I mean like HTML website-based. And we tend to work in slide-based software and interactive elements. So we had a steep learning curve. We had to figure out how to leverage our software in new ways to ensure that our content was accessible. And we had to also learn new softwares. So NVDA and JAWS are 2 different types of screen reader technology that many students at Concordia use. NVDA is a free software that anyone can download, and JAWS is a paid software. So our journey to accessibility, making the shift to accessibility was complex, and we ended up working with a company called Chow, which is a Quebec-based company, and they specialize in accessibility. And so we had our courses of eConcordia, our catalog, audited to see where our current state of accessibility was, where we were making mistakes, and what we could improve and how to improve these technical mistakes. And our journey is still honestly ongoing. As we move forward, it is, it's very apparent to us that the more effort we put into making our courses accessible, the more we remove these barriers, the more students we will be able to reach. So I'm going to now share with you some tips and tricks that we have learned through all our trials and errors. But before I do, I want to take a little pause and see if there are any questions yet.
So far, we're all good, Vanessa, but if anyone wants to put something in the chat, I'm here to take care of that.
Okay. So I'm going to move on. So the first things we're going to talk about are in-class lectures. Many lectures are given using PowerPoint slides. And because classrooms vary in size, your content should be visible for students in the front row and in the last row. So some ways to do this, font is the first thing, right? Font size minimum should be around 24 point. And the font type you use is also important, right? We want to make sure there's legibility. Sans serif fonts, so like more simple fonts that have less sort of characteristics in them, flashier characteristics, tend to be popular, but it's also, think about things like the opening of an E and a C versus an O. So the closer your E and C are to closing, the more likely they can be mistaken for an O for some people if they're way in the far back. So the example I have on screen that to your right is Arial in 24 point font. The next thing you consider is when using color, don't only use color to signify importance. So like a correct or incorrect as example, we tend to use green for correct, red for incorrect, but if you are colorblind, that isn't going to help you any. So we like to say add the label correct and correct, or an icon like a check mark or an X, just so people have that further clarification. And contrast of colors is very important. And this is an example of a contrast checker. So the ideal ratio between colors is a 4.5 to 1 ratio, which means the light and dark colors have that amount of difference in them. So I will be providing with my PowerPoint and later in the resource section a link to this contrast checker for everyone. And then next is the amount of content you have on screen. So you don't want to overwhelm students. You don't want them reading too much and not paying attention to what you are saying. So there's these rules called 5x5 or 7x7, which means 5 points with 5 words in them or 7 bullet points with 7 words in them. Either is great. We understand that not all content leans easily to this. So this is more of like a guideline to try to follow. You also want to be aware of what content you have on screen versus what you're saying in class. So we see this a lot with profs that we've worked with at eConcordia, where we get PowerPoint slides from profs that they've used in their class, and they have great content on screen, but then their script is talking about something else. And sometimes they think it has to be 2 different things, but cognitive load tells us no. If I'm talking, what I'm saying should be paraphrased, summarized on screen, because otherwise your attention of your learners will be completely split. They'll be either focusing on one or the other. And if they're two different things, they're not going to be able to follow both at the same time. So try to keep that in mind. So this is an example of a slide because I'm about to poll everyone. So throughout this presentation, during the section of tips, we are going to see some examples peppered in where I'd like to ask the audience to pick the example that they feel is most accessible. So I'm going to show you 3 slides. So this is the first slide. This is the second slide. Slide B. That's slide A, slide B, slide C. And I'm going to go cycle through them again. Jesse, if we could bring up the first poll. Is it up?
Yep,
sorry, I can't see it.
Sorry, I haven't brought it up yet. Is this a descriptive language poll 1? Because I think.
Oh, I apologize. It
one only has 2 options.
It should be slides.
Okay, I got it.
Sorry.
Here we go. Sorry, everyone. Here's the poll on your screen in 3, 2, 1, go.
And in the background, I will cycle through the examples for you again. A, B, C.
So everybody answered the poll. I'm just going to put the, I closed the poll so no one else can answer. Would you like me to share the results now, Vanessa?
Yes, please.
Here we go.
Well, everyone was right. Yeah. And I don't know if that's just because I'm that good, but yes, slide A was correct. Slide B, the issues here were the font were too small and the style of font wasn't the best type. It was a little bit too fancy. This had serif in it, so it had those extra sort of points and flips at the ends. And slide C, I'm sure you all guessed, the color contrast was not high enough. It's below, if we look at the contrast checker here, it's below 4.5. So another tip for content and in-class lectures is videos. We always suggest to show video with captions if you can. If you can't, any resource with a transcript is great if you can provide it to students, or even a summary of what the video was about, just because you want to make sure that everyone will have access to that content, especially if they're going to be tested on it or need to know it for an assignment. So next is language. Language is a tricky one because there's so many habits that we have that we may not even realize, you know, that we're saying something that maybe isn't optimal. And a lot of things are baked in our language, right? Certain sayings, cliches, idioms. I know my bad habit is, you know, saying to a group of people, hey guys, I really should be saying, you know, hi everyone, hi all, like, how's everyone doing, right? Not everyone is going to be a guy in the meeting normally. So it's just taking those things in consideration and being as descriptive and inclusive as well as you can. So descriptive language is referring to like the clarity of your language and avoiding sense-based or jargon terms. You don't want things to be overly complex as well. So if we consider things like the following phrases, if you look over here, you will see that, or listen to what they are saying. These are not necessarily optimal things to say in a course. Consider maybe things like, if you shift your attention to the schedule, you will note that, or pay attention to what they are saying. So what I'm doing with the first example is, if you look over here, where's here? What am I looking at? I don't have the context for that. So shifting your attention to the schedule. So I'm looking at the schedule, but also look is not necessarily optimal for everyone if they can't see the schedule. So you're shifting your attention. And then you will see, again, same thing with look. It's very site-based, so you want to say you will note. And then, of course, for the second example, listen. Not everyone can hear what is going on. So again, we change it to pay attention. And by contextualizing your language and replacing these sense-based terms, you can improve the learner experience and ensure a shared understanding. So now we have descriptive language poll 1. And so the examples: develop a vision about Canada and Canadian society, or develop a broad understanding of Canada and Canadian society. Which one would you think is a better example of descriptive language?
So far, we have about 3/4 of the participants who have answered. A couple more seconds here. Okay, I'll end the poll.
All right, and let's see. Yeah, so majority is right. If the key terms here to think about were vision and broad understanding, not everyone can visualize something, or the way they conceptualize things are different. So it's just about using terms that are universal. And so we have our second descriptive language poll. Pay attention to acronyms like NAFTA. Be sure you know what these mean. Watch for acronyms like NAFTA. Be sure you know what these mean. So again, you're selecting the one that you think is a better use of descriptive language.
We've got about 50% of the group who've answered. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, I'll end the poll in 3, 2, 1.
So exactly, majority correct again. Here, the key terms were pay attention and watch. Again, not everyone can watch in the same way. This, connotes like a very visual way of watching. So language, we also believe should be inclusive. So we advocate for language that respects and includes all communities, is free from sexist, racist, and other discriminatory language. It does not inadvertently exclude groups and avoids stereotypes, loaded words, and patronizing descriptors. So this is a lot to think about and to process. So it's important to note that, first of all, terminology can vary and is constantly evolving. So, this is something that we always have to sort of keep up with. And as society progresses as well, so will our terminology. So some key tips that I like to share with people is use pronouns, inclusive pronouns rather, and avoid gender-based nouns as things like they, someone, a person, unless you're specifically referring to a person or give an example. You don't need to gender it. There's no real purpose for it. Avoid stereotypes based on race or ethnicity or the exceptions to the rule. So I have examples like, oh, they're all like that. That's obviously a stereotype. And one I hear a lot is like, oh, you're so well spoken. And that's inferring like you're so well spoken for either, this group or this type of person or whatever it is, your gender, who, when we talk about Indigenous communities, you want to, especially in Canada, you want to avoid a language of ownership. So, we say Indigenous people living in Canada, not of Canada. And then also avoid disability metaphors. So these are things like falling on deaf ears, blind to their flaws. And now we have a poll. Yeah. So which example do you think is the best for inclusive language?
We've almost got half of the participants who have answered. Wait a few more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1, ending.
Yeah, majority correct. Yeah. And this is something, that a lot of us take for granted. Oh my goodness. Skipped ahead. So yeah, so here like synthetic versus man-made. Man-made is not the greatest term because it's not only men doing the making. It's the same thing like with mankind, man hours, things like that. It just comes from a very, gendered workforce in the past, and shifting and progress in society, like we want to move away from terms like that. So our next example, inclusive language 2 poll. Only a crazy person would do that. Only an irrational person would do that. So again, you're choosing the one that is the best example of inclusive language.
Just a few more people haven't participated. I'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Absolutely, 100%. Great. So yeah, you want to avoid terms like crazy or psycho. there's a lot of stigma around mental health, and using language like this only helps to perpetuate that. So we try to move away from diagnosing anyone or using those terms sort of flippantly. Yep. So yes, crazy irrational. So my next tips are back to practical things like resources. So I know like we use PowerPoint, sometimes we turn them to PDF resources, or we make Word or our own PDF files for resources. So if you're creating a Word doc or PDF or PowerPoint that will be a PDF, alt text is the first thing you're going to want to consider if you're using images. So alt text or alternative text is descriptions of images, and you don't need to do this for like decorative or sort of ornamental images. This is really more for images that have information that you need to contextualize and describe the purpose of. And you can think of it sort of like, what is the goal of this image? What is the purpose? What do I need? What understanding do I need from it? You don't necessarily need a verbatim description. So like, it's a picture of a tree on a hill. Like that's maybe not the point you're trying to get across. It's more like the loneliness of something, for example. Next is using heading styles. So Word documents, PDFs, they all have the section on the home ribbon where you can see normal text, heading 1, heading 2. So screen reading technology, if you're giving out digital copies, will use headers like a table of contents. And it allows students to sort of navigate through your content, to know where they are and situate themselves in your content. So it's really important to use these. And they can be edited to change the look and feel as much as you want. Another thing to consider is symbols and equations. Again, for digital resources, for a screen reader to properly read a symbol or an equation, it's really important that you use the proper symbol. So instead, for example, of using X on your keyboard for a multiplication symbol, you'll want to go to like equation and add the multiplication symbol, because otherwise you'd have a screen reader reading something like 3x2 equals 6. And that's kind of disorienting. I don't really know what that means. And similarly, if you're using tables for digital resources, again, you're going to want to use the table function, not using shapes or anything like that. Do use the headings in tables and try to avoid merging cells because it makes it very difficult to read. But a screen reader will go through columns and rows correctly when you use the table function here for Word and PDF documents. But please do note, if you're making PDF slides that you're turning, PowerPoint slides that you're turning into PDFs, tables and equations will show up in a PDF and be read as images sometimes. So like, be sure to add alt text to these. And Adobe Acrobat has the ability to do that. Oops, sorry, I've skipped ahead. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. So if you're using a third-party PDF for like a course pack that's going to be digital, you're going to want to avoid scanned documents as much as you can, because it's a picture of a document. It makes it harder for Adobe Acrobat to pick out the letters. If there's an original digital copy, that's great. Do not use scans of scans, because every time a scan is scanned, it's the quality of the image is lowered again and again. And please also don't use documents that have highlights or notes taken on them if possible. Again, that makes it very difficult, not only for screen readers, but anyone who has like a print disability. It makes it harder to focus on the correct text. So Acrobat, Adobe Acrobat has something called the accessibility checker, which we like to recommend, and it's a good way for you to check a PDF from a third party or your own PDF that you've created to make sure it is accessible. I believe that most staff and faculty do have a license through Concordia for this, so you should be able to have access to this. And it gives you this little report on the left-hand side menu and tells you like if you're missing alt text, if there's any heading issues, if there's something that can't be read. So now we have our PDF poll. I believe this is our last poll. So here are 3 examples of a scanned PDF document. Which one do you think would be the best for a screen reader or for any student in general for reading?
We've got answers coming in quickly this time, Vanessa. We're almost at 100%.
Awesome.
Give it a few more seconds. I'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. C. So C is correct. Yep. You'll notice in A, we have that sort of black strip in the middle from being scanned multiple times. It gets darker and darker. There's also underlining. In B, we have many notes taken in underlines. Again, not great. It's also not as clear and legible. And 3 is the best option of the 3. It's not the most ideal, that'd be a digital copy, but it's pretty good. So before I move on to a couple of examples from eConcordia, does anyone have any questions?
Vanessa, we just had one question in the chat, and we've got about 12 minutes left in the presentation, so I think you'll have time to answer it now if you'd like me to read it out, or do you want to wait until the end?
Let's answer it now, sure.
Great, okay. So we have Mercedes, who is just asking to see the preferred phrasing for the Indigenous people again, just to clarify a little bit about, I think that was in your section on descriptive language.
Inclusive, yeah. So
Inclusive
it's, you would say Indigenous people living in Canada, not of Canada, referring, like you're not referring that they belong to Canada. It's if I go back, there we go. Yes. So you'd say they're living in Canada. You wouldn't say they're the Indigenous people of Canada. And like,
oh, sorry, Vanessa, I was going to ask Mercedes if that answered her question or if she wanted to follow up with more information.
Like if more clarification is needed, like absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. That totally makes sense now. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, no problem. So I worked on a course with the Canadian Red Cross about working with Indigenous communities, and I made the mistake of saying Indigenous Peoples Canada. It was the first correction I got, and I have been sure never to make that mistake again. A little side note, little bonus, in Canada, preferred terms are, if you're talking about a mass group, is in Indigenous people in general, but then there's First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and of course then every group, every clan, every tribe has their own particular name, obviously, that you would want to refer to them as if you're talking about, you know, someone or a group specifically. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna, are there any other questions?
That's all we had in the chat, but as you're
okay.
Back to your section, I'll just double check if anyone else has questions in the chat, please put them there.
Just fast forwarding. Okay. So, yeah, so I'm going to go through just a few small examples because there's so many and I don't want to take up too much time with that. But so our first ones, this is a course from our music therapy master's program, and it shows multiple means of representation. I only have a screenshot of this, unfortunately. For student privacy, I don't have access to the course, but so just to you know, shift your focus here. So what you're seeing really is 3 ways to access one lecture. So we have audio, video, or a text transcript. There, you know, we don't do this for every single course where we have all 3. We tend to have like a video type lecture And then there's always a transcript that is available. A different way to show multiple means of representation, though, is just having different types of content in your course as well. So like a lecture, readings, videos, examples, and case studies. Not so much the same thing over and over again, because you want to make sure you are giving all learners with different sort of needs and preferences a way to sort of conceptualize and internalize content. But we do, whenever we have an audio or video, we always have a text alternative to it, just to make sure that everyone can access it, whether visually or with a screen reader or like that. So our next example, I'm actually going to change my screen over. Not this, not this. Okay, so on eConcordia, we have our Student Success Center. If you went to Jesse's presentation, you may have seen a bit of this, but we have animated videos with captions. So we like to make sure that, like I said, anything we have has a text version of it. So it's it's a cute little animation just to show you what it looks like a bit. Yeah. Our next example would be so this is our Theo course in our Moodle. And if we go to lesson 1, we have this interactive knowledge check. So this is an ungraded quiz. And this is really great. It's accessible to screen readers, all the text, all the interaction. And then we have this check button, which is the submit button. So what it does is it ensures that the student is the one submitting the answer, not just by making the selection. So one of the accessibility rules is nothing is done. There's no change to a screen without a learner or user rather prompting that change. Consenting to the change, really, right? Because think of a multiple choice question where you make a selection and it auto submits. And you're like, oh no, that wasn't the right one. I wasn't done thinking through this. It's the same kind of thing. Here you see the feedback that we give feedback, but also not only are we using color, but we also have the check mark to indicate the correct answer. And it would be the opposite. If I had gotten it wrong, you would have seen an X and red. And if you look at the bottom here, we have question 1 of 6. So you're letting the user know exactly where they are in this knowledge check. It's an easy way to situate themselves if they have to navigate away and come back. They know where they've left off. And yeah, so this is another example. This is what one of our video interactive lectures looks like. It looks kind of like a standard video player. We have a table of contents. We have the play pause button. We have the scrubber bar for progress. We had the rewind, the volume, the full screen, previous, next, transcript up here for our text version. But you'll notice here to the far left, there's this little glasses icon. So it says enable screen reader mode. We like to call it SRM internally, but so the screen reader mode, if I hit this button, if I toggle, what I get is this sort of cleaned up version, accessible version of the slide. So you'll see we have slide 2 of 7 up here for learners to know where they are. We have the audio, the title. This image has alt text on it. So if I was using a screen reader, I would get a description of what is the emphasis and focus on this image. And then I have the text here that is accessible by the screen reader. And then again, below we have those other player buttons we had before, previous, next, the table of contents, and then the transcript. And what's great about this transcript here is that users can also copy and paste it over to help them take notes better. While this is called the screen reader mode, it is not solely for users of screen readers. We try to make both this version of our slides and this sort of default, more visual version as universal designed as possible. We try to make it as accessible as possible for everyone. So I'll just show you a little bit more of what that would look like. So we have different like tabs here. We would have narration. I don't believe I'm sharing sound, so you can't hear it. But so we have this, but if I toggle over, I'm getting this sentence here that is describing what's happening in that image for me. So if I prefer this version of the lesson, I'm not going to miss out on the importance of the image that was here. Again, this is, so this image is a little bit more important. They're showing a position and how injury can occur. So here we would have the image available in the screen reader mode with alt text, which you can't see. And then the last version, we will return to my PowerPoint. So the last example I want to show is multiple means of action and expression. So the quiz 2 specifically for this course, what it has is, oops. So what it has here is a standard quiz, but then there's also submit the optional component. So the optional component for this was actually an audio component. So students had 2 ways of sort of sharing their knowledge and what they've learned and their understanding of the content in 2 ways. And this is great. You don't always have to do this, obviously. You can have a different way to have multiple means of action expression in a course would be having different types of assessments in the course. So having that standard quiz, but maybe also an essay or a written component, maybe a group project, could be a video project, you know, a presentation in class. It's all about giving students options and different ways to show their understanding, giving them a little bit of agency in that. And so just to do a wrap up, because we've covered a lot today in this time. So accessibility is about equality and equity. For Concordia, that means using universal design for learning as a guide for course design, leveraging our software in new ways, and just removing as many barriers in our courses as much as we can. When making your content more accessible, try your best to use descriptive and inclusive language. This is a tough one, I know. We have so many habits and things in our language that we use that, you know, have changed so quickly in recent times that it's sort of hard to keep up. Set up your PowerPoint presentations as appropriately as you can for in class with font size and type, with the colors and how you use color, and then of course the amount of content matching what you say and the amount just on screen alone. And try to curate accessible resources as much as you can. So that's videos with captions or transcripts or summaries available. Any resource or text digitally that is screen reader friendly. If it's, you know, a hard copy of a PDF, try to make it as clear and legible as possible. And so I will provide these links. I believe I can in the resources section later, but there's a link for UDL guidelines if you want to learn more, a link to a color contrast checker, the Adobe Acrobat Accessibility Checker instructions, and a guide about writing alt text.